My daughter was 3 days out of open heart surgery when my mother saw her photo for the very first time. Not because I sent it to her, because someone else did without asking me. My mother hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. She didn't know I was pregnant. She didn't know my daughter existed. She didn't know that for 6 hours, a surgeon's hands were the only thing standing between me and losing the one person I loved more than anything in the world. And when she finally saw that photo, my daughter, small and bandaged, tubes taped to her tiny chest, my mother did something I never expected. My name is Warda, and this is the story of the silence that almost cost my mother everything, and the photo that broke it. 2 years before my daughter was born, my mother and I stopped speaking. It wasn't one dramatic fight. It was the end of years of smaller ones, finally reaching a point neither of us could walk back from. My mother, Nasim, had never approved of my husband, Bilal. Not because of anything he'd done, but because he wasn't from the family my mother had imagined for me. Different background, different city, a modest income compared to what she'd hoped for. She said, more than once, that marrying him would be throwing my life away. When I married him anyway, she didn't come to the wedding. She told me on the phone the week before that if I went through with it, she didn't know what kind of relationship we'd have afterward. I went through with it. She meant what she said. For 2 years, there was nothing. No calls, no messages, no acknowledgement on birthdays. My father tried to stay neutral, which mostly meant staying quiet. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, was the only real bridge left. The one person who still spoke to both of us. I found out I was pregnant 14 months into the silence. I remember sitting with the test in my hands, feeling joy and grief arrive at exactly the same moment. Because the first person I wanted to call was the one person who wasn't speaking to me. I didn't reach out. Pride played a part. I'll admit that honestly. But mostly, I didn't want to hand my mother an opportunity to make my pregnancy about her disapproval of my marriage instead of about the baby. I decided I would build this new chapter of my life without her, the way she seemed to have decided to let me. My aunt knew, quietly, because I needed at least one person from that side of the family to know. I asked her not to tell my mother. She respected that, even though I could tell it weighed on her. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Routine scans at 28 weeks picked up an abnormality in the baby's heart, a congenital defect that would need surgical correction after birth, the doctors explained. Serious but treatable, with the right care and timing. Bilal and I spent the rest of the pregnancy preparing for a delivery that would immediately be followed by specialists, monitoring, and eventually, surgery. Noor was born in early spring. She was small, fierce, and from her very first cry, entirely herself. The cardiologists confirmed what the scans had shown. She would need open heart surgery within her first few months of life to correct the defect. Those months were the hardest of my life. I barely slept, terrified of every small change in her breathing, her color, her feeding. Bilal and I leaned on each other and on his family, who showed up for us completely. His mother staying with us for weeks at a time, his sisters bringing meals, his father quietly covering costs insurance didn't reach. I didn't call my mother, even as the surgery date approached, even as fear sat permanently in my chest. I didn't call her. I told myself she'd made her choice 2 years ago, and I wasn't going to hand her access to this most vulnerable chapter of my life after she'd walked away from easier ones. The surgery happened on a Tuesday in June. 6 hours. I remember almost nothing about that waiting room, except the exact shade of the wall paint and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. When the surgeon finally came out and told us it had gone well, I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry the entire pregnancy. 3 days after the surgery, Noor was stable enough for a short visit from close family. Bilal's mother came, held her carefully around the wires and monitors, and asked if she could take a photo to share with family who couldn't be there in person. I said yes, without thinking too hard about it. It felt like such a small, ordinary request in the middle of everything else. What I didn't know was that my aunt was in that family group chat too. The same group chat that included my mother. My aunt told me later that she hadn't meant to cause anything. She said the photo appeared in the chat, a tiny sleeping baby with tape and tubing across her small chest. And within seconds, my mother had asked, "Whose baby is this?" My aunt didn't lie to her. She told her the truth, that this was Noor, my daughter, 3 days out of open heart surgery. I found out what happened next only because my aunt called me, her voice unsteady, telling me I needed to sit down. My mother had gone completely silent in the chat for almost 20 minutes after finding out. Then, without a single word to anyone, she'd booked a flight, the earliest one she could find, and was already at the airport by the time my aunt called me. I remember standing in the hospital corridor, phone against my ear, feeling something between panic and disbelief. 2 years of silence, and now she was showing up uninvited, on a day I hadn't chosen, walking into a moment I had specifically kept from her. My first instinct was anger. This wasn't her right to claim. She hadn't been there for the pregnancy, the diagnosis, the sleepless months of waiting, or the surgery itself. Showing up now, after a photo she wasn't even supposed to see, felt like she was trying to insert herself into the hardest and most sacred part of my life, without having earned any part of it. She arrived at the hospital 4 hours later. I was standing outside Noor's room when I saw her walking down that corridor, older than I remembered, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move, her eyes already filled with tears before she even reached me. She didn't ask permission to see Noor. She didn't launch into an apology or an explanation. She just stopped in front of me and said, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please. Can I see her?" I stood there for a long moment, torn between two versions of myself. One version wanted to tell her to leave, to say that 2 years of silence didn't get erased by one photo and one flight. The other version was simply achingly tired of carrying anger through the hardest months of my life, tired of holding a door shut that some small part of me had never actually wanted closed. I let her in. My mother sat beside Noor's bed for a long time without speaking, just watching her tiny chest rise and fall. Eventually, she told me something I hadn't expected. She said that seeing that photo, seeing a baby she hadn't even known existed, bandaged and fighting for her life, had made 2 years of pride collapse in the span of about 90 seconds. She said she'd spent those 2 years telling herself she was protecting our family's standards, our reputation, some version of what's right that had mattered more to her than actually knowing me. Looking at that photo, she said, none of that had meant anything at all. All that had mattered was that her granddaughter existed, was suffering, and she hadn't been there. I told her honestly that I was still hurt, that showing up now didn't erase 2 years, and that I needed her to understand that going forward, if she wanted to be part of our lives, it would have to be without the conditions she'd placed on me before. No more commentary on my marriage. No more silence as punishment when things didn't go her way. She agreed, not defensively, genuinely. It's been 8 months. Noor is healthy now, thriving with a scar across her chest that my mother traces gently with one finger every time she visits, which is often now, though always on our terms, always respectful of the boundaries we rebuilt together slowly. My relationship with my mother isn't what it was before the silence, and honestly, I don't think I'd want it to be. It's more honest now. She apologizes when she oversteps. I tell her clearly when something bothers me instead of letting it build into another 2-year gap. I've thought a lot about that photo, the one I never meant for her to see, the one that ended up mattering more than anything I could have said in a phone call. Sometimes the truth finds its way to the people who need it most, even when we've spent years making sure it couldn't. If a photo or a single unplanned moment has ever cracked open a silence in your family that felt permanent, I want to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe for more real, emotional family stories every week. Suggested description copy: she saw the photo, she booked the flight. My mother and I hadn't spoken in 2 years. She didn't know I was pregnant. She didn't know my daughter existed until a photo taken 3 days after open heart surgery reached her by accident. What she did in the next 4 hours changed everything I thought I knew about the silence between us. Subscribe for more real, emotional family stories every week. Has a single unexpected moment ever broken years of silence in your family? Share your story below.